This is Steve Saltwick, and welcome to Your Brain, a Personal Tour Seminar 4. Today we talk about the neural genesis of human culture, with a focus on primate foundations. We'll talk about the path that Mother Nature took to evolve the human brain from our nearest evolutionary ancestors. Now that is a complex path, but three major milestones stand out. The first is how the evolution of your brain and the culture associated with it amazingly depends on the ability of primates to efficiently forage for fruit in trees. Now that capability is an amazing capability, but it also sets the stage for compulsive gambling in humans. The second milestone is how the evolution of the human brain from primates depended on the ability to forage concepts like ripe fruit. That's an amazing capability, but it's also setting the stage for tragic human disorders where one loved one cannot recognize the face of another. And then finally, the third milestone is how evolution provided for the advanced concept of social cognition, our ability to deal with the social aspects of our environment. But those brain capabilities also set the stage for the emergence of autism and other related spectrum disorders. The subtitle deals with the fact that the ability to repeat a Buddha phrase, Nembutsu, is an amazing achievement of human culture, but it would not be possible before we learned to eat fruit in a tree. Now, that is an amazing story. I hope you enjoy the seminar. Let's begin. We begin, in fact, with a stereotype. This 13th century sculpture of the 10th century itinerant priest Kuya, who innovated the 6-syllable Nembutsu, the phrase of Buddha, is outstanding in many different dimensions. The technical detail, the concepts involved, the execution of craftsmanship. The human brains that produced this were very capable. However, the human brains that produced this suffered from a stereotype that exists even until today, and that is that the human brains that could produce such a work of art were completely different than the animal brains inhabiting the planet with us. Human brains that could produce such a work of art were on a different level, completely unique, very, very different than the brains of animals who couldn't conceive of such things and could never execute them or anything like this kind of work of art in their own respective environments. Let's take a look at how accurate such a statement really is. Statements around unique human capabilities usually center around three main themes. The first is animals can't use tools. They do not have the necessary brain circuits to recognize tools and to use them as extensions of their body to accomplish particular tasks. The second theme is animals have no cultural transmission system. They don't have kindergartens or schools. They have no way of indoctrinating the next generation into the skills of the current. And the final and probably most prevalent was no real use of language. I can say clearly that animal research has shown without a question animals can do each of these capabilities, differently than humans perhaps, but they clearly do have the capability to do these kinds of things, and they do so in the wild. Let's look at a few examples. In the top left-hand corner is a picture of a chimpanzee troop in Africa. They are using pliable limbs taken from trees to poke and then withdraw termites from mounds. These are a delectable source of protein for chimpanzees, and they're quite adept at using tools such as these. Now, this is a familiar story to many people. Jane Goodall reported on this many years ago. But chimpanzees are not the only species capable of using such tools. If we go to the ocean and look at a cetacean, this is a porpoise using a sponge to protect its nose. Porpoises delight in finding fish at the bottom of oceans in crevices such as this. But they have a very sensitive nose, and so they'll pull a sponge out and then cover their nose as they search for fish in such crevices. Now, chimpanzees and porpoises are fairly advanced animals, and many people are aware that they have quite large brains. Let's go to a third species on the use of tools, and that's in the lower left, which is a crow. Now, this crow is sequentially using 4 different tools to retrieve a packet of food. Each tool is hidden in a test tube-like cylinder. Each tool is successively longer than the previous one, and the crow must retrieve each tool in sequence in order to get the final one, which he's drawing out now. This is a long handle that allows him to reach into the final cylinder and withdraw the packet of food. Crows have turned out to be amazingly intelligent in the use of tools, as this video shows. And then finally, let's take a look at a cultural transmission system. On the bottom right is a picture of meerkats. Now, meerkats are not just cute, but they also operate kindergartens. This is the mother meerkat incapacitating a scorpion, a standard diet of meerkats, in order for her young pup, now shown in the diagram here, to learn how to incapacitate and then consume a scorpion. The mother meerkat will assay the level of expertise of the pup and then increasingly allow the scorpion to have more and more function as the pup learns to handle it. At first, the mother will completely bite off the stinger, then she'll partially disable it, and then finally on graduation ceremony, the pup will face a completely alive and awake scorpion. In terms of the use of real language, let's turn to a very famous animal. There have been several animal species demonstrated to use the facilities of language, but my favorite example is Alex the parrot. Let me give you an example. Upon being dropped off at a veterinarian's office, Alex said quite clearly, "Come here. I love you. I'm sorry. Want to go back." This statement clearly demonstrates that Alex not only knew how to use the facilities of language, but also how to plead. Now, Alex had been trained for 30 years by Irene Pepperberg. She picked up Alex quite randomly almost in a pet shop near Chicago O'Hare Airport, and she used a model rival training routine. In this routine, Alex observed Irene and a human assistant modeling a behavior they wanted him to do. He would get attention from Irene by imitating the desired behavior. All of a sudden, Alex started verbally correcting miscommunications between the 2 humans. Voila, a famous parrot was discovered. Alex could name 50 different objects, recognize quantities up to 6, distinguish 7 colors and 5 shapes. Alex understood the concepts of bigger and smaller, and same versus different. He had the intelligence of a 5-year-old, according to psychological experts, and the emotional level of a 2-year-old at the time of his death, which shows the use of pleading. He was very famous, accorded an obituary in The Economist, and you don't get more famous than that. And he clearly is an outstanding example of how an animal, in this case very far removed from a chimpanzee, can demonstrate the use of language. However, I will note, Alex did not, or gray parrots do not normally display this kind of behavior in the wild. It was 30 years of training for Alex to get to this level of proficiency. So we have to remember, even though the capability of language may be in some animals' brain, the actual demonstration of the behavior may not appear in the wild and may require very long periods of training for us to understand that yes, indeed, that capability is in a parrot, or other animal's brain. But with all due respects, animals can't and don't do nubetsu. For all the awesome capabilities of the old world monkey we see on the left, we have never found an instance of animals creating a statue like Kuya on the right. No concert has been conceived like Bach by an animal. No painting has been executed like a Da Vinci by an animal, in several other dimensions. So there really is something unique that happens between a primate brain and a human brain, and that's what we're going to investigate next. So if we look at an evolutionary diagram of a human brain, and we see that it passes through primates with previous ancestors like macaques and chimpanzees, we see that the brain changes, and more specifically, the brain changes in a fairly complex way. Some areas of the brain get larger and more dense than others, and we can see that in this diagram. If we map a macaque to human brain transition, we see that certain areas of the brain become more dense, have more cells, larger cortical surface than others. The more yellowish the color in this diagram, the more the brain has expanded, either in density or cortical surface area, between a macaque brain and a human brain. And there's two areas that really stand out that we'll talk about next. The first is an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. That's in the front of your brain, obviously, as shown in this diagram. And the second area is called the inferotemporal cortex. This is on the side of your head, or a macaque's head. And these two areas of the brain are quite unique in terms of their contributions in the evolution of human culture. And if we look a little more deeply at the prefrontal cortex, will show just how far off the scale a human brain is. This maps really the percentage of your brain that is represented by prefrontal cortex relative to the total cortical surface of your brain. How much of your brain, if you will, is contained in that prefrontal cortex? Your brain, the human brain, is off the chart here, even when we compare it to other primate brains. So that leads us to our first question. And that question is what? What is so special about the front part of the primate brain? Is this the thing that really sets primates apart from all the other species? Is this part of the brain the unique differentiation of humans? It turns out that this part of the brain is very, very special. It's not the only unique thing, but if we had to pick, or if I had to pick, one part of the brain that makes the difference between humans to primates to the rest of all other animals on this planet, then it is the front part of the brain that is absolutely unique. The capabilities that were enabled by these new areas of the brain, especially the front part of the brain, enabled the opening of a new ecological niche, the forest canopy, especially on fruiting trees. Now, the set of behaviors necessary to exploit this were significantly different than other elements of this family tree. Let's take a look at a rat. And we're going to focus on eating behavior. How does a rat eat? Let's take a look. Here's a rat consuming a bit of chocolate, his favorite treat, but notice how the food is consumed. His paws grab a piece of food, it is lifted to its mouth and then chewed. This is pretty similar to the way a rat would eat in the wild, even though it was photographed in the laboratory. But you get the gist by watching this film. Now let's take a look at a primate in the forest canopy. In this environment, there is no stable earth. The animal is perched on a branch which then moves relative to the food that he is attempting to consume. There is a huge spatial aspect in terms of the three-dimensional arrangement of objects, other animals, fruit, and branches. This is a much more complex behavior just even to eat. But to find the food, to categorize it, to understand what food is to be eaten and not eaten, etc., is quite a challenge, and the capabilities underpinned by these new areas of the brain allowed monkeys to exploit this wonderful new niche, and that set the stage for the evolution of human culture. Now, as we said, the exploitation of this new ecological niche required several different kinds of capabilities, and that's what these new and expanded areas of the brain provided capabilities for. Many, many thousands of pages have been written about what those capabilities entail, but I think the best way to summarize them simply and overall is to say those new areas of the brain, or expanded areas of the brain, provided two critical family of skills: efficient foraging and effective social groups. This picture tells it all. Here is a troop of macaques in the middle of a tropical forest about to forage for food, and they're doing so in a social group. This set of behaviors, in my opinion, underpin the march to human culture. Let's take a more detailed look and see why. Foraging is no walk in the park. A given monkey troop's home range may have something on the order of 100,000 trees. 4% of those trees may be ripe at any one particular time. The fruit in such a range is highly clustered. 60% may be in one site, which might be one or a few number of trees, 0% in others. Fruit that looks the same, one could be toxic, one not. Other fruit that looks different could have greater protein benefit than another. These make foraging complex. Foraging is also done in the daylight, so it can be dangerous. You're exposed to predators. You are competing with other primate groups. There could be other monkey troops in the trees that you wish to forage from. There could be threatening monkey groups. Chimpanzees are renowned at eating other monkeys, so one must be careful which trees to visit and must be aware of who is in those trees before one forages. And then there's a complex relationship to home group size. The larger the group, the better the search and the more experience is there to be tapped by the troop as a whole. However, that's more expensive compared to a smaller group where there would be less internal competition and more food available for any one particular monkey. So the parts of the brain we're talking about that evolved to underpin this kind of behavior was faced with a significant challenge. How that challenge then caused various subparts of those brain to evolve is what we're going to look at next. Now, foraging, in my opinion, can be broken down into four essential capabilities, and that is what these pictures depict on the slide. Beginning with the picture on the left. Recall that the distribution of fruit in a typical home range is very patchy. Different kinds of fruits ripen at different times. Different kinds of fruits have differential protein benefit. And so a monkey troop evaluating a daily foraging task must evaluate several different kinds of future outcomes. And that is one of the capabilities that these new and expanded areas of the brain support. If you look at the picture next to them, you'll see two different kinds of fruit. These fruits look completely different, they taste completely different, but they have one thing in common: they ripen at the same time. A monkey troop encountering one of these fruits will immediately expand its search pattern to fruits of both type. That means these monkey brains have mastered the abstract category of, quote, ripe fruit. The next picture shows a path of a foraging group of monkeys as it approaches a, quote, good tree. When monkeys forage, they focus on particular trees. They will bypass barren trees. They will bypass trees with fruit on them to get to preferred sources of fruit. That means these newly evolved areas of the brain are capable of focusing attention on a future goal several steps away. And that is an essential underpinning of human culture. And then finally, monkeys, when they find a good tree, will exploit the fruit on that tree for a certain period of time. So they have a strategy to deal with a successful location of a fruit tree. However, monkeys also must have strategies to deal with the unexpected, an aggressive competitor in that tree. And these new areas of the brain have the capability of supporting behaviors that stick with exploiting the fruit on a tree for a certain amount of time, and or shifting to a different tree faced with unusual or unexpected circumstances, and that is another essential underpinning of human and primate culture. Now, can we find cells in the brain that map to these foraging behaviors? And the answer is yes, we can. Let's start with strategies. When a monkey finds a fruit-laden tree, the strategy that is expressed in behavior is to stay at that tree and pig out. So this is a strategy of sticking with the current behavior. Keep on eating. However, if something unexpected happens, like a very aggressive monkey in that tree, the monkey will shift their behavior and do something else. Their intention was to eat at the tree. Now they'll either avoid it, make appeasing gestures to the threatening monkey, or select an alternate tree. Can we find neurons in the brain that do that? And the answer is yes, we can. Now, the behaviors are different. We can't record from a monkey in a tree, but they're similar in terms of, are there neurons that indicate an intention by the monkey, the primate brain, to stay with the current behavior? That's a stay strategy, or shift to some other kind of behavior amongst a multitude of choices. Here are three neurons that show you exactly those kind of strategies in terms of their response, and they are from this front part of the brain. The middle neuron is a stay strategy neuron. This indicates that the monkey will repeat the behavior that was successful on the previous trial. The shift neurons, which are on either side of this central neuron, are shift strategy neurons. This indicates that the monkey will do some other behavior other than the behavior on the previous trial. So it represents a shift in behavior. These kinds of cells directly underpin the kinds of behaviors we see in foraging monkeys. And they are a clear indication that this part of the brain can deal with higher order concepts like strategies in terms of staying with a given working behavior or shifting to some other kind of alternate behavior. Another way to understand the function of this part of the brain is to see what happens in human behavior when this part of the brain is damaged by stroke or the removal of cortex to treat epileptic seizures. And gambling is a good activity to study for this kind of brain area. Now, it turns out there's a standard way to study gambling. It's called the Iowa Gambling Task. And the subject is presented with 4 decks. 2 of the decks, we'll say B and D in this instance, have high payouts, but they pay out very, very infrequently. Two of the other decks, A and C, let's say in this instance, pay out less, but they pay out fairly consistently. So winnings over time will be much better with decks A and C than compared to decks B and D. Normal subjects with fully functioning human brains gravitate over time to the A and C deck, and they consistently orient their behavior to get higher and higher payouts. However, if this part of the brain is damaged by stroke or surgical intervention, we see two unique behaviors develop. The first is a persistence in a losing strategy. Even though the subject C's B and D deck pay out, very infrequently, they will not shift to use the other decks. They're stuck in a losing strategy. So, in essence, they don't have the capability to shift when conditions warrant. The other thing we see is even when these subjects are playing with decks A and C, a winning strategy, they all of a sudden abandon it. So they have a limited ability to stay with a winning strategy. People with damage in the prefrontal cortex should not be allowed to get close to gambling tasks. They have a distinct challenge in orienting their behavior based on future or predicted outcomes, as shown in this task and as related to how monkeys forage. Let's look at the neural underpinnings of another aspect of foraging behavior. This is the valuation of future outcomes. Now, as we've talked, as a monkey finds a good tree with fruit on it, the natural inclination is to pig out on that tree. However, since the fruit is distributed in a patchy manner, and since other variables like weather, fruiting pattern, movement of competitors, etc., define a value of switching from that particular tree to another tree or patch within the home range. And that's shown in this diagram on the right. As the monkey is exploiting a tree or patch, there is a declining value of staying there and a rising value of switching until they meet. Then there's travel time to the next patch. The monkey begins exploitation of those patches. This kind of economic analysis goes on in terms of driving behavior. And as it turns out, we can find cells in the prefrontal cortex that exactly mimic this kind of behavior. There's an area in the prefrontal cortex that increases its activity over time that drives a switching strategy once the monkey finds a rewarding tree or patch of trees. And notice, this is driving behavior away from the inclination of whatever the monkey is doing. It's driving a change in behavior against an inclination by the monkey to stay with that behavior. In this instance, it causes a switch in behavior from foraging in patch 1 to foraging in patch 2. But that's not the only time that a brain area like this could become involved. Let's take a look at a different kind of example from the human realm. Now let's study the corresponding area in a human brain that relates to the area of the monkey brain we just saw. That part of the brain that evaluates future outcomes and drives a switching of foraging behavior from one patch to another. But let's take it in an opposite direction by studying courage. And courage, as studied by two Israeli researchers, is doing a behavior against what the rest of your brain is telling you don't do, against fear. It may be climbing a high mountain, it might be doing a bungee jump. The way we study that is by placing human subjects in something called a functional magnetic resonance machine that allows us to study the brain of a human being in real time. And on the other side of this machine is two stimuli. One of the stimuli is a teddy bear. The subject can move that teddy bear closer or farther away from his head. But there's another stimulus, and that is a snake. Here is a snake being moved closer and closer to this subject's head on the other side of this very large donut. This almost universally invokes fear in human subjects, and it's a good measure of courage, that overriding capability to do a particular behavior even in the face of fear, that we study here. And as it turns out, yes indeed, a portion of the prefrontal cortex is reliably implicated in the ability to override one's fear and drive that snake closer and closer to your head. So what this means is there could be general purpose areas of the prefrontal cortex that are involved in the overriding of a natural inclination. If you're in a tree and it's got great fruit and your normal response is to pig out, this area ultimately overrides that and forces you to go to a different patch or tree. Likewise, if it's a fearful environment and your normal response is don't do that, whatever it is, this area of the brain ultimately allows the overriding of that and the performance of a behavior that is counter to that. This is a unique aspect of higher evolved brains, and it means we might be able to get a difference in behavior across a wide variety of dimensions by training this in one task and then seeing its effects in another. I find this a fascinating area of brain research, and much new research will bring to bear additional insights. Now let's look at the third aspect of foraging behavior in the monkey prefrontal cortex. This one is focused attention to a goal several steps away. If you look at the foraging pattern shown on the left, you'll see that this means the monkey troop needs to go under a tree, then go left to a fruit-bearing tree, go under that, then towards the right, and then go to the second tree on the right after that. So there is a particular sequence of behaviors that must be executed to get to the, quote, good tree in this particular foraging exercise. Now, can we find cells in the monkey prefrontal cortex that show such sequential behavior? And the answer is absolutely positively yes. In this series of tasks, a monkey is given a go signal. Now, at that go signal, the monkey must perform a sequence of tasks. The available behaviors are turning a knob, pushing the knob, or pulling the knob. Sometimes the monkey was trained to alternate their behavior, as in turn, push, turn, push. Sometimes the monkey was trained to pair the selective behaviors, something like turn, turn, push, push. And then other times the monkey was trained to repeat sequences of 4, turn, 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 what have you. What was found is in areas of the prefrontal cortex, there were clearly cells that predicted the successful execution of those kinds of sequential behaviors. The top row shows the response to alternate selective behaviors. These would be turn, push, turn, push. A variety of other things are shown below that diagram. The middle row is on paired sequences. Turn, turn, push, push, turn, turn, pull, pull, etc. Those are shown in the red diagram in the middle. And then finally, the 4 repeat selective cells show a sequence of 4 successive instances of a behavior. Turn, 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 push, 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 etc. So we find a rich complement of cells in the prefrontal cortex that are sensitive and drive sequences of behavior across a wide variety of sequences not associated with any particular response, but associated to the sequence of behavior. And this is significant in the organization of monkey and human behavior. Now, we study the effects of damage from stroke or surgical removal for epileptic treatment in this area of the brain with humans by constructing a task that is highly dependent upon the sequence of actions. This particular task is called the Towers of London. There's a similar one called the Towers of Hanoi with more circular discs, but this one will suit our purposes quite nicely. In panel A, the subject is shown an initial configuration of balls on posts, and the task at hand is to produce the target configuration. In A, the solution to this puzzle would be move the red ball from the shortest pole to the longest pole, and then move the blue ball onto the shortest pole. I'll leave it to you to figure out option B. People with damage in this area of the prefrontal cortex are hopeless at such sequential tasks. They flounder about for particular sequences. They get halfway along a successful sequence of behaviors and then abandon it, which means that people with damage in this area of the brain often can't let themselves into their own house. They know they need to get their key. They know they need keys. They know there's a lock on the door. They know that the door will open if it's unlocked, but they can't get the sequence of behaviors down. It creates a very frustrating environment for the human subject, and it is highly sensitive to sequential changes. So if once the sequence is learned by using other cues generally, if anything changes, then the whole thing falls apart again because the sequence is not really known. So this is a good example of how human behavior today is dependent upon changes in the brain that came in to support foraging behavior of primates. Let's look at the last capability underpinning foraging, and that is the ability to learn abstract categories. We saw that monkeys display in the field knowledge of a category of ripe fruit. When they find either one of the fruits, as shown on the left, ripe, then they will spontaneously alter their search patterns to incorporate both fruit. How do we study that in the lab? Well, we train the monkeys to discriminate between sets of stimuli. In this example, let's say any of the images shown under A, A1 through A4, mean the monkey will be rewarded with juice if he performs a certain action. The B stimuli, B1 through B4, are not rewarded. Each trial, a different stimulus is presented. So when the monkey performs at a very high level, and they will rapidly learn this task, that means they are equating any one of the A stimuli with juice and any one of the B stimuli with not juice. And we can show that in a fairly dramatic way by reversing the meaning of those stimuli. So if we show that and look at behavior, when we reverse the meaning of those symbols, all of a sudden, B1, let's say, which wasn't rewarded, becomes rewarded. And the monkey, when that happens, will make a mistake. The first time a new stimulus is presented, when the meanings have been reversed, the monkey will make a mistake. But what we find with primates, and this is in contrast to a lot of other animals, is that after that one mistake, all of a sudden the monkey returns to extremely high levels of performance. The meaning is when one of the B stimuli changes meaning, they all change meaning. And likewise, all of the A's change meaning as well. This demonstrates a very sophisticated understanding of the experiment, and this is shown not only in the behavior of the monkey, but in cells that reflect this behavior as well. Now, building categories is a complex behavior for the primate brain and your brain, and we now need to bring in two areas to explain this phenomenon. If we take a look at a monkey brain, we find two areas essential for this task. The prefrontal cortex is the driver, and that's shown in the upper left of this diagram. A new area of the brain that we haven't seen until now in this seminar is the inferior temporal cortex, and that's shown in the lower right, and that's where these categories are stored. We know that because if we separate the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the inferior temporal cortex, then old categories are retained, but new categories are not built. I want to draw your attention to another aspect of this slide, and that is the categories vary greatly along one particular dimension. Your brain and a primate brain is highly sensitive to faces. Those are shown in the pinkish areas of this graph, as well as objects. Those are shown in the blue areas of this figure. The place that they're stored or analyzed are separate, and faces in particular are subject to quite a sophisticated analysis. We can show that by recording from neurons in the inferotemporal cortex as we present various faces to the subject monkey. All these cells react strongly initially to faces being presented, but then they're highly tuned to the configuration of that face. In this instance, these cells are highly sensitive to threat-like displays. Those are the open mouth of a face with barred teeth. We'll talk about this more in the next section, but what I want to bring forward in this slide is this is an advanced capability of the primate brain. It takes two areas working in concert to build these categories. The prefrontal cortex is the one that is driving the process. The inferotemporal cortex is where these things are stored. And that gives us advanced capabilities as we go forward. The categories represented by the inferior temporal cortex can be quite complex, and we can see that from looking at the results of damage to this area in humans. When this area is damaged, the resulting condition is called agnosia. And there's two primary categories. In associative agnosia, a patient can reproduce a model drawing but cannot name it. Therefore, in this category, they have or are able to produce a motor program to actually draw the object in front of them, but they don't have it associated with the verbal identification of the object in terms of its name. In aperceptive agnosia, the subject can produce the name of the object, but doesn't have the motor program associated with reproducing that object associated with it in terms of the category, or it is not accessible. Agnosia is also different than memory loss. In memory loss, the memory is irretrievable regardless of the sensory modality it's presented. In this instance, a gentleman looking at a set of keys does not know or cannot respond with what they are, and when he picks them up, he still doesn't know or can respond with what they are. However, the woman who is suffering from agnosia, upon picking up the keys, knows they are a set of keys. She would know how to use them, and she can do this from using some other sense modality other than vision to gain a representation of the object and associated categories of responses surrounding that. This can be of great benefit with a category of agnosia where someone cannot recognize faces, especially the faces of a loved one. While the subject visually may not recognize the face of someone, the experience of smelling a particular cologne, watching the subject walk, other aspects of their behavior in terms of touch can bring back a memory of that, and hence the condition can be hard to detect over a long period of time, or these are techniques that can be used to refresh or get around the challenge as a result of cortex loss in this area. So I think it's a good time to invite Homer back and look at his summary of where we are in the seminar so far. And as you know, Homer oftentimes thinks about eating and food, and so Homer has an analogy. If his brain was a bunch of people trying to decide where to go for dinner, how would that relate to the brain areas we've seen so far? Now, I'm sure everyone has had a similar experience. When a group of people get together, typically someone emerges as the leader trying to figure out a strategy for gaining agreement. Do we want to go somewhere close? Do we want to eat Italian? Some dimension, and then there's resulting discussion around various categories of decision, and then we get agreement. And just so in the brain. The prefrontal cortex would be the dude driving the decision, suggesting various strategies. We want to go close. Do we want a particular type of food? And the inferior temporal cortex would be Yelp, the storage area for the various categories that a given strategy could infer. That's a great way of thinking about these expanded capabilities, all arising from new foraging behavior in primate, but setting the stage for unique aspects of human culture. Let's turn our attention now to another aspect of the expanded capabilities of the primate brain, social cognition. Now, social cognition is gaining benefit by watching, interacting, and/or imitating members of your own species or other species. It's a widespread behavior in animals. However, this capability reaches its peak in primates and humans. We'll look at one fundamental aspect of social cognition, imitation. And by looking at this type of behavior, we can increase our understanding of the primate brain. Now, imitation consists of three essential capabilities. The first is to determine what to imitate. The world of a primate is a target-rich environment. What in that environment should be chosen to imitate? The second is to determine how to imitate. What are the muscle movements or motor programs that need to be executed in order to imitate a given behavior? What about the intention of that behavior? Is that analyzed? And then third is to get rewarded for imitating. There must be a reinforcer here, either the direct consummation of a reward, the avoidance of danger, or sometimes, as we will see, simply looking at something is rewarding in and of itself. Even though this macaque in a hot bath in Japan shouldn't be looking at a mobile phone, it clearly finds this rewarding, and we'll see some examples of this in this section of the seminar. Now, there's a clear prioritization of objects that your brain analyzes when determining what to imitate. And the clear winner of that prioritization scheme is faces. Here are recordings from inferotemporal neurons. Those are the neurons on the side of your brain in the temporal lobe, as they are presented faces that vary on 37 different dimensions. The neuronal response is shown on the bottom. This particular neuron in the temporal cortex is sensitive to the face aspect ratio, that's length to width ratio, inter-eye distance, the eye aspect ratio, so that's length to width of the eyes, and the iris size. Neurons can be found that analyze these dimensions with tremendous specificity. So one of the first things your brain does is analyze objects in the environment to determine what is a face. And after that, it subjects it to further analysis. Now, once your brain has determined where is a face, it will subject it to further analysis primarily regarding, is it attached to something that is alive? Now, how does your brain determine something is alive? It evaluates on the dimension of biological motion. What's biological motion is far easier to show than describe. So let's take a set of lights and have those lights move in a certain way. Your brain is hardwired to interpret this as an individual walking. You interpret this as the lights being attached to points on the arms and legs and their joints, and you interpret this movement as basically walking to the left. Your brain is hardwired to do this in a variety of situations. If you look at a different pattern of lights, we can see this set doing a little dance. You will infer emotional states, or your brain will infer emotional states from these patterns of light. And this means that not only is your brain prioritizing the processing of faces, it is prioritizing the processing of faces that are alive. Now, can we see this in monkeys? And the absolute answer is yes. When monkeys look at patterns of light, and we can present two different kinds of patterns, they're shown on the left here. One is a series of lights that are scrambled. They cannot represent a monkey walking along a path. The alternative is to show a pattern of lights that could be associated with a monkey walking along a path, and we find brain cells that are highly attuned to the biological motion, that is the one shown on the upper left here in this diagram, preferential to a scrambled set of lights that really have no meaning. They couldn't be, those patterns of distribution couldn't be found in a monkey walking along a path. So the what, determining what to imitate, becomes determining a who to imitate. Now, the part of your brain that subjects objects to analysis, that looks for special aspects of faces that determine what is alive, is the inferotemporal cortex, and that's shown within the red circle here on the diagram. Some people call this the object analyzer. It breaks down objects into various categories, where faces is a special category, alive things are a special category, and it then represents that information to other parts of the brain. Other people call this the what system. It's basically the part of your brain that subjects objects to analysis, forms categories about those objects, and then provides that information to other parts of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, for example, for strategy selection and valuation, etc. So this is an extremely important part of your brain overall, and it's absolutely essential in terms of determining who to imitate. Now, once your brain, or a primate brain, has determined a who to imitate, it will proceed to determine how to imitate. And the first thing it does is to analyze the gaze of that alive face. So there's a fair amount of circuitry in your brain to determine what that attended face is looking at, and then you will reflexively follow that gaze. And we can show that with the following experiment. So in this experiment, we're going to have a monkey, a test monkey, fixate upon an object, and then we're going to show him a cue. That cue is represented here as a monkey face looking either to the right or to the left. After that, we're going to show the monkey a target. The target could be on the left, the target could be on the right. And the monkey must follow wherever the target was. So if we show a target on the left, the monkey must move his eyes in what is called a saccade to the left. If we show him a target on the right, then the monkey must quickly look to the right. Now, what's interesting is what happens when the face we show as a cue is looking in the same or different directions as the target. If they're different directions, it's called incongruent, and if they're in the same direction, it's called congruent. We measure the response time of looking at these, targets, the saccades to the targets, and we find that when we cue the monkey, when we show him a face that is looking opposite to the way we want the monkey to look in the test, it takes far longer. And that is because the brain of the monkey has analyzed the gaze of the cue, determined which way it's looking, and has started the eyes moving that way. Then all of a sudden we show a target, and he's got to course correct and go back the opposite way. And that takes a lot more time. So your brain is wired to analyze for faces that are alive, to determine the direction of gaze, and then to follow that direction of gaze. After your brain has analyzed the visual scene and found a who, it will follow the gaze of that who and then subject the movements that it observes to intention analysis. Now, these kinds of analyses are performed by mirror cells We saw them in Seminar 1, but let's briefly review their function. Mirror cells encode the intention of a motor act. So look at diagrams 1 and 3 in this figure. These are recordings from mirror cells. We see brain histograms below each cartoon figure. And this particular neuron, all recordings are from the same neuron, this particular neuron encodes grasping to eat. So it fires when the monkey observes a human grasping a food object and bringing it to her mouth, as well as when the monkey grabs a food object and brings it to its own mouth. The neuron, as shown in 2 and 4, does not react to grabbing motions to place the food object into a bowl. So, again, we find a who, analyze what it's looking at, and subject its movements to intention analysis. And this kind of processing goes on in what is called a premotor area of the brain. Now, this sits next to the classic area of the brain that controls, fingers, arms, limbs, etc. And it represents, again, the intention of movements. Once the intention of movements are analyzed, they can be used to control motor programs to imitate the motor act. Now, normally when we imitate the behavior of an attended alive face that's doing something, we get rewarded. We get a piece of food, we get to avoid an unpleasant stimulus. But we can show that just imitating the gaze of an attended face is rewarding in and of itself. In essence, we're enjoying the view. And the way we show that is we take a task, and now this is a saccade task, so the monkey has got to glance either to one target or the other, shown as T1 and T2 in this thing. And the monkey will get juice regardless of which direction they look. However, one of the targets is paired with the image of a monkey. It could be their face, it could be something else. And what we're interested in is what is the equivalence between juice and juice plus a monkey face. If the monkey face is rewarding, then we'd have to pair it with less juice to get equivalent behavior to juice alone. If the monkey face is not very pleasant, if it's unrewarding, then we'll have to overpay, if you will, in juice to get the monkey to look that way the same number of times that it would look for just juice alone. So, if we study a new area of the brain, this is in the parietal lobe, across a variety of images that we show here, not just monkey faces, but other parts of a monkey, we get very interesting results. Now, there were two monkeys in this study. One is represented by solid bars, the other is represented by just outline bars. And what we find is, when we pair that juice with the picture of a subordinate monkey, then the picture of the subordinate monkey is unpleasant, it's unrewarding, if you will. We have to overpay in juice to get the monkey to look in that direction. A gray square is neutral, it's neither, so juice is equivalent in that instance. If we use a picture of a dominant monkey's face, dominant in terms of the social group that that particular subject is in, we find that is indicated as rewarding. We use less juice to get the monkey to look in that direction. And then finally, the most significant was, the most rewarding view was that of a hindquarter. So these hindquarters were female monkeys, and I will note that the subjects were all males. It's time now for Homer to weigh in on a summary set of observations on this section. And the first thing Homer would say is, wow, I had no idea that my brain was so into faces and gaze. Facial analysis, determining what's alive, using that as a target, gaze analysis, to then set the stage for imitation and other higher order behaviors are fundamental activities of your brain. When those circuits go awry, they result in social complications. Autism spectrum disorder is highly implicated in this area. And the second observation from Homer is that monkey see, monkey do is actually a positive statement. imitation is a fundamental tool of teaching, pedagogy, and cultural transmission. We saw that again with the meerkat kindergarten on Scorpion Day. So these fundamental behaviors of the brain underpin a particular behavior, imitation, that is brought to the fore by your brain. In our last section, we'll look at two behaviors that are thought to uniquely differentiate humans: reasoning and social cognition. We'll look at how primates can show capabilities in these areas and contrast them to what humans are capable of. Now, the primate brain can be shown adept at semantic analysis, and this is understanding the meaning of arbitrary symbols. And we can show that in the following experiment. Here, the concept of number is represented by the dots on the left. So there is the concept of 1 dot, 2 dots, 3 dots, and 4 dots. And we're going to train the monkey that arbitrary symbols, in this case the Arabic numerals for 1, 2, and 3, are appropriately paired. 1 with 1 dot, 2 with 2, 3 with 3, and 4 with 4. And then we're going to investigate the prefrontal cortex of the monkey to see if we can find representations of number in that area of the brain. And the answer is yes, we can. In this diagram, we show a neuron from the prefrontal cortex that is attuned to the numberness, the numerality of 2. It responds significantly stronger to both the dots and the shape of 2. Corresponding neurons can be found for 1, 3, and 4. I do not show them here. This is not the only place that can show semantic analysis of number, but it shows you a good general characterization of a primate brain that underpins the concept of number, and it can do semantic analysis, meaning analysis of symbols for the underlying concept of number. Other animals, for example, Alex, the parrot we showed, could understand small amounts of numbers. Primate brains are larger in kind in its ability to do this kind of semantic analysis. Now, the primate brain can also be shown to be rich in nonverbal reasoning, and typically these are called rules. So a familiar one would be same or different. Again, we're studying the primate prefrontal cortex that's shown in the circle diagram on the right, and we're assaying the behavior of a monkey to understand the concept of same and different, and we show some examples on the left. In this task, the monkey's trained in one of two types of tasks. If the task is demonstrate the rule for same, then when two objects are presented, one after the other, the monkey must release a lever to show that he has reasoned those two objects are the same. He would hold if they're different. Likewise, if we're trying to get the monkey to indicate he's aware that the objects are different, he would release the object if they are different, and that's shown in the bottom half of the A section of this diagram. Now, we can find neurons in the prefrontal cortex that encode these rules, which really mean that when the objects are the same, regardless of the object, then this neuron's behavior clearly indicates the future response of the monkey. So in the bottom half, in B there on the left, we show a single neuron from the prefrontal cortex of the primate that encodes the rule of same, and that's shown in the blue part of these diagrams. When the objects are the same, regardless of the object, this neuron encodes that fact and then is used to drive a motor program of releasing the object. So there are many other kinds of rules that can be found in the primate brain. The main point I want to make here is that these are non-verbal. They can be solved visually, and they represent a rich tapestry of rules that the monkey can use in foraging and in other kinds of behavior. Now, I want to note emphatically that these rules are learned. A monkey brain is not born with prefrontal cortex cells recognizing coffee cups or toy cars and the ability to indicate same or different. A monkey is trained to do that. He learns that this rule can be applied to generate a reward. So the primate brain in your brain has rich capabilities in this area of the brain to learn rules, and that underpins nonverbal reasoning, reasoning that does not require language. Reasoning that almost certainly involves language, and to date has been human unique, is called semantic reasoning. Now, in this example shown on the slide, the statement is read, "A bird is to a horse like an airplane is to a car." Is that a true or false statement? It's true in the sense that birds and horses move. Birds fly, horses move on the ground. Airplanes and cars move. Airplanes fly, and cars move on the ground. So there's a series of meanings behind these symbols. There's a series of relationships related to those meanings, and they can be evaluated as the same or different. Language most assuredly plays a part in this kinds of reasoning, and no animal subject has been shown reliably to exhibit such reasoning. Here is an example of a human unique capability of our brain, and we will talk about this capability in the next seminar.
The last primate capability we will explore is social cognition. It's probably easiest to explain with a story about the human capability in the context of a social dilemma. Suppose you go to the farmer's market and you see your favorite vendor at his usual stall. He usually gives you a discount if you're friendly to him. Lately, his fruit hasn't been that good, and today there's a new vendor next to him with fantastic-looking fruit. What's going through your mind? That looks good, but I know if I go to the new vendor, my old vendor will be upset. He may not give me the best fruit anymore, or a discount. And the new lady looks very nice and friendly. She might give me better service and fruit. But I'm afraid of upsetting my good old fruit vendor. Oh, what will they think? And why are these things so complicated? To make a good choice in this situation, you use brain circuits that identify social contexts, make inferences about the mental states and likely actions of others, and estimate the cost and benefits of different transactions. You then make a decision and learn from the result. It's enough to make you want to drink a wine. Well, primates have very similar brain circuits and use them in similar fashion. The primate we see here is trying to decide about cooperating with another male or helping care for the offspring of a female member of his group. Different payoffs and benefits in a social decision context for both. So in many ways, these are shared brain systems, with one major exception. Only the human has a brain area called the temporal parietal junction. We will see in the next lecture how this area is unique to the human brain, and what that means for a range of behavior. For now, it suffices to say that you are aware of what the other vendors may be thinking, and taking that into account. Primates do not. They can be empathetic and show other advanced social cognition, but a large volume of research says that they do not think about the mental state of others prior to making a decision. That's not to say primates are social nitwits. They, as a species, display an admirable range of exemplary social behavior. For example, altruism and fairness. Let's take one example from marmosets, the cute little dudes we see here. Marmosets are cooperative breeders, and by that I mean that infants receive care not just from their parents, but other helpers in the group. This is different from chimpanzees and other apes. But they're not alone in the animal world. Meerkats, magpies, wolves, and foxes are known to be cooperative breeders. Now, in several experiments, marmosets can be shown to be altruistic. They will work to give food to another hungry member of the group, whether they're related, paired, or not. This is an advanced behavior, and the social circuits of the brain shown on the previous slide make this possible. Now, since this behavior is not shown in all primate species, there must be subtle differences between the brains of those who show this behavior and those who don't. Research is active into what those differences are. Primates not only can display altruism, but they also have a keen sense of fairness, which springs from these same circuits. The best way to show you this is with a video. Here, the renowned researcher, Frans de Waal, author of the book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are?, describes and demonstrates this in a very famous experiment.
So a final experiment that I want to mention to you is our fairness study. And so this became a very famous study, and there's now many more, because after we did this about 10 years ago, it became very well known. And we did that originally with capuchin monkeys, and I'm going to show you the first experiment that we did. It has now been done with dogs, and with birds, and with chimpanzees, but with Sarah Brosnan we started out with capuchin monkeys. So what we did is we put two capuchin monkeys side by side. Again, these animals, they live in a group, they know each other. We take them out of the group, put them in a test chamber. And there's a very simple task that they need to do. And if you give both of them cucumber for the task, the two monkeys side by side, they're perfectly willing to do this 25 times in a row. So cucumber, even though it's really only water in my opinion, but cucumber is perfectly fine for them. Now if you give the partner grapes, the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food than you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
Time now for Homer to weigh in on our last section. And Homer says two things. The first is, it seems to me that a primate brain is pretty smart in the laboratory. And the point Homer's trying to make here is that many of the capabilities we've seen today are not displayed in the wild, but they're readily apparent in the laboratory. That means a primate brain had capabilities foreshadowing human capabilities that might not have been expressed in the wild, but were clearly capabilities of their brain. So as the human species evolved, it received capabilities that were not apparent from primates, but they could be rapidly used once certain triggering events or capabilities happened. We'll see the impact of this next time. And the second is, but you got to be careful on the interpretation of complex skills. Much like when we were watching the chimp give direction or looking at, symbolic analysis or association with monkeys, it is very, very common for humans to read in intention and capabilities to things that they are observed, to behaviors that they're observing. This illustrates an amazing capability of the human brain, and it makes interpretations of complex skills very, very difficult. That concludes Seminar 4. I hope you enjoyed it. In Seminar 5, we'll look at human brains and all their glory. The goal of the seminar will be to investigate and present the unique capabilities of human brains that give rise to the vibrant culture around us. Now, I tried to pick one item that could represent that culture, and I came up with Switched on Bach. Not only is it an example of classical music of great beauty, but it's also an example of technology achievement with the Moog synthesizer. Here is technology extending the beauty of classical music in one unique package. What kind of brain could produce this kind of object? It turns out there's a unique underlying capability that is essential into the production of such an object. And it's represented by this film. Now, I want you to watch this film and then think about what you think these triangles are doing. You got that? Watch the film and think about what you think these triangles are doing. It turns out that is an essential capability for producing Switched on Bach. And with that, we'll begin the film. See you on the next seminar.